All right. We are back. Episode 12 of ArachNerds, brought to you by Fulvius Apparel. FulviusApparel.com. Check it out. Facebook, Instagram. Use the code THN at checkout. Get 15% off your order. That is the exclusive promo code for THN listeners and viewers like you. Added some new stuff to the website recently. I got some other stuff I need to add still. Been picking up on the slack a little bit on the Fulvius front as far as offerings and things like that and all that good stuff. So please check that out. And so it's just me. Serg is stuck at work. Phil was possibly going to sit in, but Phil's MIA. Haven't heard from him. He's probably at work. I'm the only person with a regular 9 to 5. So we're back. Joined again by Mr. Brandon Russell of Arachnid Rarities. There was a lot. If you haven't listened to the first episode we did with him, it's a couple episodes back, scroll down and find that. But we're back. There was a lot of stuff we really didn't get to cover. So we're hoping to sort of get into that here a bit. Talk about Verve Biotech, which is another. Are those two like that and Arachnid Rarities sort of like go hand in hand, or are they sort of more?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, Verve was first, and then Arachnid Rarities was kind of created in an effort to kind of generate some kind of revenue to help subsidize costs. So it's essentially Arachnid Rarities exists to help subsidize, the research costs, the having the facility and materials and things of that nature. It doesn't come anywhere close to actually being profitable, but it just helps buffer, buffer so I don't lose too much money on that side of things. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, let's sort of jump right into it. As far as the Verve Biotech thing, how did that come about? What are you sort of doing with it? Sort of the whole rundown, I guess, of the operation.
Yeah. So, most. Well, I mean, I think we touched on kind of on the first episode about kind of finding, the passion for the animals and things with, we're starting with kind of the invertebrates and reptiles. And then, once college hit, kind of went full speed into my academics and career thing, and then started a family quite early as well. So, for most of college and early on in my professional career, really didn't do a whole lot with the reptiles or invertebrates. We had a few things here and there, but nothing too much. Started off working in startup companies, developing swine vaccines using virus-like particles, so kind of a different, kind of an innovative vaccine platforms, and so kind of that's where I kind of got my first taste of kind of a startup company, that environment of high pressure, limited funding, do everything, and everything that's involved with having a business that's trying to create and license a vaccine for use through the USDA. And so being exposed at a very high pace, and learning curve was really, really quick. So quick learning curve, learning every aspect of the business, from the research development side to manufacturing to marketing to all the nitty gritty of about how to run a business, and so did that for a while, and then with startup companies too, the pay is not the best, right? Because you're trying to be a part of something, and but that time around, my wife and I had just recently had twins, or she had the twins. We added twins to the family, and I got a job offer that was kind of too good to turn down, kind of thing, and so it required us to move to a different state, and then it went for working for a larger company. So working for a really large animal health company in the research development department, developing analytical assays for vaccines. So analytical assays, mostly potency assays. So a potency analytical assay basically is a test that you develop and validate that measures kind of your active ingredient in a vaccine. So whatever your biological active ingredient is, if it's a bacterial vaccine, it's the bacteria part that's generating the immune response, or that you want to generate the immune response to. So you have to develop these potency assays and validate them to ensure that kind of touch on the vaccine business a little bit. But when you create a vaccine, you have basically what you call your efficacy vaccine, or your like reference vaccine, that you prove this vaccine shows protection in the animals. And then that then becomes your reference on that potency assay. And then every additional vaccine batch you make, you have to test it against that reference vaccine. So every vaccine you make has to have higher amounts of that material in it than the reference vaccine in order for it to be basically meet the guidelines for the minimum immunizing dose.
So does that mean, like, if they say they make one, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, are they then having to go back and say, okay, we'll change this back to how it was, we think it might be this part of it that we have to adjust, and like continually, like, until it gets to where you want it to? Or is it like you do sort of a spectrum of those efficacies, and then those get tested against sort of the baseline?
So usually kind of what happens in the beginning is like a proof of concept. So you'll start off with maybe a couple different formulations.
Okay.
And you'll test them on a kind of a small scale to see, is this generating immune response? That's usually first. And then when you're getting a good immune response, then, what follows that is you'll tend to run like a kind of a small scale challenge, where you're vaccinating the animals and then challenging them so you're basically infecting them with the disease it's to protect. And so you're going to kind of basically build up where you're figuring out kind of what your dose is. You may go in, for the test initially to say, okay, we're trying a few different doses and see what kind of immune response we get. And then we'll pick the ones that we think generate a good immune response. And then, the efficacy study. So the study that kind of solidifies that, hey, this vaccine works and this is now your reference, that usually comes almost towards the very end of the development of that vaccine. So from that part, when you do that study and use that material as a reference, then generally speaking, like no other changes are going to be done to the process, to the ingredients and everything like that. That's your set in stone kind of deal. So the potency assay is just one of the testings that's required to be able to get that material licensed and also be able to release that product to the market. So usually you have purity, so you want to make sure you have no contaminants, potency, safety. So another thing is safety. So anytime, so if you go to the vet and they vaccinate your dog with those vaccines, each one of those batches have been safety tested, to either in mice, sometimes host animal too, so sometimes even dogs, to make sure that batch is safe. And let's see, safety, purity, and then potency. Yeah, so there's a couple of little pieces here and there, but those are just some of the general tests to make sure that vaccine is a high quality product to be able to meet the standards.
And how long is that process typically from start to finish? It can't be quick.
No. I mean, when you talk about like conceptualization of an idea, right, and starting to do research like in the lab, kind of being able to grow the material, start testing the material. If you're talking a vaccine, I would say super quick would be like 3 years. That'd be really quick.
Wow.
More so like 5 or 6 sometimes. It just depends on if it's newer technology that can take a little longer, just because there tends to be more like regulatory hurdles you have to kind of meet. But yeah, that timeline kind of plays into some of the challenges and things with like Verve. When I get talking about Verve itself, to where when you're working towards creating a product that is hopefully the end use is going to be in animals or in people. And I'm talking like that vaccine. I'm talking this is strictly like animal health. When you look at human, human
that's a whole
health,
other ballgame.
That timeline can be quite a bit longer, with quite a few additional, regulations and the clinical studies. Obviously operate much different or much more expensive with people than animals. So yeah, it's a long process that there's a lot to go into it. Lots of money, super expensive when you're trying to create a product that you want licensed, whether it's a vaccine or whether it's an antibiotic or whether it's anti-venom. All these pieces, extremely expensive, extremely time consuming, and also the risks are high. So you could, there's been, you look at human health, there's been plenty of times where drug companies have spent $1 billion plus on a product only for it to never be licensed. So when you look at some of the R&D stuff involved, now granted, like that's probably something that went way, way deep into, down the line of getting close and then just never, wasn't able to get it licensed. So an exorbitant amount of money is spent on the R&D side of things. And there's obviously always high risk with that. So yeah, that's so main part of that job was developing those assays. So in addition to those potency assays, which are measuring the good stuff that you want in the vaccine, also develop clinical assays and in-process assays. So like an in-process assay is going to be like, if you're growing up bacteria to use for a vaccine, the in-process assay is going to kind of measure how much stuff is in that bulk material, then that you'll then dose it out into the actual vaccine. And then clinical is developing an assay that essentially is looking how well is that animal responding to that vaccination. So you kind of so that helps out when you develop those clinical assays for the to see the differences between the different doses of the.
Is that going to be similar to like an LD50 kind of thing?
That it can be. It's mostly, typically it's going to be like a serology assay. So you're going to somehow measure the antibodies that's responding. So you can do like a protective dose. So we try to avoid using animals at all costs when you're developing these tests. And actually that's been a huge part of my career is actually back in the 70s and 80s for that potency test. Instead of doing a test on the lab bench, they would do them in animals, to where they literally would vaccinate animals, whether it's mice or hamsters or rabbits. You vaccinate those animals, and then you infect them with what it's supposed to be protect against, and then you're making sure that it's protecting, right? So then that's kind of your direct link to, okay, well, this vaccine's protective now because we gave it to the rabbits, and the rabbits didn't, get sick when we infected them. So as time has gone on and more advancements have been made, the technology in the labs, now you kind of convert those tests to just without using animals at all. So benchtop, just in an ELISA, kind of like an ELISA is essentially kind of like a pregnancy test, in essence, where you have kind of antibodies that you'll coat, and then the material that those antibodies are against, right? So a pregnancy test has basically has a capture where it captures that hormone that's indicative of pregnancy, and then on top of that, another thing will attach that hormone that has a colorimetric change. So that's kind of how that works. So an ELISA is something similar, but it's on as multiple kind of wells or testing spots versus just a strip for a pregnancy test.
Gotcha.
So doing that testing, over time, you try to convert these potency tests out of animals into the benchtop. It's really, really difficult to kind of do that work, especially for some of the different vaccines out there. And so a lot of my projects that I've had over time in industry have been to kind of convert those testing that's done in animals to the benchtop and eliminate the use of those animals, because it's really important. All companies take that aspect of things really important about reducing the number of animals and types of animals they have to use for testing and for research, and so there's always an effort to reduce that. I know, for the safety testing, I mentioned, if your dog goes and gets a rabies vaccine, traditionally, those vaccine lots have been tested in dogs to make sure that lot material is safe. But I do know there's also efforts where you're generating enough data over time to show, hey, we don't need to test these in the host animal anymore. We can use something like mice or something instead for that testing. So it's definitely over the last 20 years been a big push to continue to reduce and eliminate animals in research. And there's still situations, right, that that you have to use them as per in order to meet the guidelines for for getting those vaccines licensed and testing those vaccines. But a lot of effort goes into minimizing that to the absolute little as possible.
I would think from a cost perspective as well, it's surely it's cheaper to not have to house and maintain however many animals and however much space.
Yeah, there's a huge cost savings, absolutely. And that can be part of the drive. But at least for the companies that I've been involved with, there's been I've been lucky enough to be around being companies that have genuinely made an effort to say, hey, we want to do the best. And also for the animals that are kept, for safety testing and the testing that's required, in order to test those vaccine lots in order for them to be released. Even for mice that have to go through the safety testing and things, giving them the most naturalistic, so I mean, it can be somewhat similar, right? You have in the reptile world, people are breeding rodents for food sources, right? So looking at, okay, how can we, while these mice are here, what can we do for these mice to give them their best life? So give them a lot of nesting materials and different things that studies have shown to that kind of mimic mice's natural behaviors. And so there's a lot of that, and as you go through the different species and things, you're just giving them other things, for cows, for safety testing in cows, you go out there, they have tons of space, and they have brushes they can rub up against, and
Mm-hmm.
you give pigs like bowling balls and things like that to play with. So there's a lot of effort kind of go into like, hey, like what can we do for them? But
Seems involved.
yes, oh my gosh, yes,
A lot of moving parts.
yeah, it's super complex and a lot of things going on. I mean, just the amount of stuff that goes into that part.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and so is it you took things from your line of work and have been applying that to Verve? At what point?
Yeah, so that's where kind of I went through. So yeah, it's kind of got to a point of in my career, kind of in the vaccine world and things, like I kind of wanted more, and more by meaning like kind of more challenging projects or do more innovative things, and that can be somewhat constrained working in a larger company as far as those opportunities. You can't just be like, oh, hey, I'd like to go work on this instead, right? And that doesn't always pan out. And so I really wanted to take more control over what I was working on, what I wanted to research, stuff that was more stimulating to me, both more fulfilling and more intellectually stimulating for me. And I kind of just made a decision. I was like, well, I think I'm just going to start my own company. And I think it was something that I've always kind of thought about doing, even like when I was graduated from undergraduate school. I got my degree in microbiology, and even then I kind of like was like, oh, what am I going to do now? Do I go get a job? And I was like, well, I kind of like to start my own company, but that's a lot of something to no idea school
right.
how to approach that, right? And so that was always kind of in the back of my mind, and just kind of got the plan. Like, okay, I'm like, I know I want to do that, and then I have to figure out kind of how or what it looks like.
Yeah, like how to apply it.
Yeah. So I kind of started. I started Verve. As I formed it as an LLC back in 2017. And at that time, I was working for a company that was only doing animal health stuff. And so I just went to them. I said, hey, I'm going to start this company on the side, but it's only going to be human, right? So no conflict of interest there. So made sure to get the okay. That wasn't going to be a problem. Because definitely in the business world of science, conflict of interest and things like that can be, when you work for a company, typically any idea that forms in your head, whether it's when you're sleeping at night or wherever else, belongs to the company that you work for. Okay? So that's the typical thing. So yeah, it's kind of like, hey, I'm gonna work on this. Here's what it is, and make sure that's okay. And so started kind of forming the idea of like what that would look like. And really kind of fumbled around for a little while. I went to another company that gave me even more latitude, to where they're like, well, as long as you're not, working in this space, we don't care. So if you want to do animal stuff, with snake bites or, envenomations, go for it. And so that gave me even more latitude to kind of go through and I try to get some funding, doing some grant writing and things like that. But if anybody, I'm trying to, I don't know where I heard it from, and it's probably not originating from the person I heard it from, but basically you can't be a part-time entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So you either are or you're not. And and that's true for many ways. And I thought, heck yeah, I can do this, right? I can get this up and going and sustainable before I, jump from a really good career into something that's risky, right? Try to minimize that risk. Um, and a couple things are at play with that. One is the amount of effort needed to actually make it sustainable and work requires more than your full attention. So you can't work another job while doing that. And two, um, man, as long as you have that safety net of that job to go back to make that leap, to take those risks, um, both financially and professionally, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
It's just you're not going to do it. And so it came to a point in time where it was during COVID, May of 2020, I think. My dates are right. And where I was working, they were going kind of a different direction, and so then what I was brought into, they had actually sold to another company, and over the next few months they were going in a different direction than what I was brought in to do, and so just kind of mutually decided, like, hey, this isn't really going to work out for either one of us. Like, right, they're doing something that's different, and I don't want to do what they're going to do, and so we decided to part ways, and I was like, all right, like, here we go. Instead of going to go look for another job, I'm like, well, this is the time.
Yeah.
And there's a little more comfort in that, considering like everybody was not able to go do anything. So, so it's like, unless you had an essential job, whatever the heck that meant, there's a lot of limitations to, what you were able to do, what was open, what you could do and stuff. So I just took that opportunity to buckle down and push forward and trying to get things going. So yeah, that point is like, all right, we're off. So the idea of the company, and still is what the company is doing is developing innovative treatments and diagnostic testing for people and animals that have been envenomed by reptiles or invertebrates, or really any venomous animal, is kind of in the coverage, right, with focus on invertebrates and reptiles. So whether it's novel, innovative anti-venom, so new anti-venom technology or ways, and then also like diagnostic testing. So essentially, kind of touched on the pregnancy test of things. So looking at creating kind of a test to say, okay, if you're bit or stung, by something, let's say you're somewhere,
Arizona bark scorpion.
Yeah. So being able to, all right, here's a test, and we can say yes or no, and that also helps determine for treatments as well. And that sort of thing is really important when you are in other countries where you're super rural, right? Resources are limited, and you want to make sure that you're able to properly identify what this person was bit or stung by,
Right.
and also, which also leads to more appropriate treatments and things like that. And also from the anti-venom standpoint, looking at different technologies to creating a treatment, whether it's not necessarily traditional anti-venom, but something that's antibody based or something that's not antibody based that can be stable, right? That you can haul around and be kept with no electricity and suboptimal storage conditions and things of that sort. So there's all these pieces that they kind of look at for possibilities, to where developing something for that niche could be really important. So getting back to the kind of the funding thing, funding's always been traditionally pretty difficult. It's difficult in regards to the amount of funding is not a whole lot. It's getting way better over the last probably 5 years. Definitely getting way better on funding available for snake bites in general for the most part, and then also on some other areas. But it's, again, when you look at developing a product, right, that you're going to manufacture and sell, right, the cost of developing that product is very high. And then you have to look at the cost to manufacture that product and then to sell that product. Well, the market for a lot of those products are people that cannot afford those products, right? So there's a huge issue there that unless that product's being funded by a government or nonprofit or something like that, you're basically kind of you're basically developing a product that no one can really pay for, and that's your market.
Yeah.
And so I've always kind of likened it to, you're trying to find first world money for third world problems. When you look at trying to find funding. So, when I look at, why did I even start this company? Well, I started this company because I wanted to truly make a positive impact in some way or form in the world, right? To make somebody's lives better. And that's really kind of, I set out like, that's just, I want to do something that makes a positive difference in the world. I don't know what that's going to, end up being or what's going to look like, but that's really kind of the goal of it. And so, we look at it like, all right, well, how do we do this? How do we find money? How do we fund this in order to do this when really there's not really money to be necessarily made?
Well, I mean, even before that, like, how do you decide, is it a thing of like, when I think of, that kind of thing and what you're talking about, like Tidius in Brazil or, Andronicus or Lyris in the Middle East, like how do you decide what to pursue as far as like that goes before you even get to the funding part? Because you have to have some sort of goal, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of, essentially kind of have like a project board, right? So you kind of have a list of possibilities. And at any given time, you're kind of pursuing different stages of those possibilities and figuring out, right? So, and again, it's, if you can find money that's targeted towards developing something for Tidius in South America, then, that's kind of the direction you go. But it's a lot of, essentially kind of conceptualization and trying to, work on getting funding to pursue some of these things. So, another direction that I've kind of taken as well is looking at kind of characterizing venom from different species. So aside from, creating new anti-venom products or diagnostic, products, there's this, essentially like a treasure trove of just stuff that's in venom.
Yeah.
So, right, you have Ozempic, right, that came from Gila monster venom. All right. So, there's cardiac drugs out there that are from, snake venom. There's all these different, small molecule drugs that were basically discovered through analyzing different venom of different species.
Mm-hmm.
So where I've kind of taken that is like, there's plenty of people that are out there, milking snakes and even doing, there's quite a few groups doing research on snake bites and things of that nature too. Right. And so kind of where I've focused my niche at the moment in is the invertebrate side of things.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at all the different species of invertebrates and the components of those venoms, and each species is quite, is different in this form way. And so I look at that as an opportunity to, if I can start characterizing different species of venom and looking at differences and looking at,
potential.
Potential.
Yeah.
Then there's a possibility, right? That you can figure out something or discover something that's got some promise from a biomedical research side of things, and then maybe that down the road can help generate revenue and continue to kind of work towards some of the ultimate goals back to the inflammations and diagnostic treatments for the inflammations and diagnostic assays. So yeah, again, it's it's definitely a long process, and I do the research work when I can afford it. We talk about like writing grants. Writing grants are extremely competitive, and even more so when you're a person who is just a private company, not tied to any academic institutions.
Does that make it even more difficult?
It does. You have, I want to say, like, grant writing has a lot to do with clout, right? So clout as in, have you gotten grants before? Are you working in a research lab that is continually, publishing lots of work and things of that sort? So being just a single person, in a business that's pretty new, and I don't have a PhD. I've done enough graduate school to probably get a couple PhDs by this point, but I don't have a graduate degree. And so there's a lot of challenges in that regard to, kind of a status thing, being able to, be successful at that grant writing. And so it takes so much time. It's becoming way more competitive.
How big or like because I hear a lot about people that write grants. I know there's people where their entire job is just either searching for or writing grants. Like, what's the typical size of a grant? Like, if you're typing it out and writing it out, like how many pages are we talking for standard?
Yeah, I mean, anywhere between 20 to 30 pages. And that, there's so many components to that grant too, right? So there's your background of, here's, the information on what I want to do. Here's, what I want to do, why I'm going to do it, why it potentially is going to work. Here's what it's going to cost. Here's the facility that all this work is going to be done in. And, here's the people that are involved. And so there's so many pieces to it. And some of those pieces, right, it can be kind of cookie cutter to where like you have, your facility information, it's probably going to be used the same. It's not going to change from grant to grant. But yeah, it's the process is so, I just don't have the time, to write those grants continually and hoping that, get one that's successful here or there. And so that's where I've kind of turned towards, where I have Arachnid Rarity, is to where, the money from that helps subsidize costs of and helps fund kind of equipment and things of that nature.
And is that is that a sort of a bonus, not like selling point, quote unquote, like when you say, I'm also going to be paying for some of this, like you're not footing the entire bill, but
right. Yeah. I think, that could be an attractive marketing concept. Although I'm about the most organic marketer out there. I don't, I think about the most that I've paid for advertising is I did a video with Richard, the Transcript Collective guy, last November. I got an import in, and I sent him some stuff and paid him to make a YouTube video. And even then, I really was like, man, I don't, for me, I was like, I don't feel good about it, like paying somebody, but it's no different than having a commercial, right? And it's an opportunity to reach other people that you wouldn't otherwise reach. That's just not my style, I guess, if you will. And so, most of the time it's just kind of word of mouth, and I just share stuff, via on social media with what I get in. And so most of the time it's just spread by word of mouth. So, from the marketing standpoint, I try to make it clear. Yeah, I do. Like, this is, this money is basically going to help. This is kind of what it's doing. Is what I'm spending this money on is going towards this stuff, and that kind of goes into play too when people look at prices and things of that sort. You kind of get in about prices about this recent import that I got in just a couple weeks ago, because that's been super exciting. Because people don't realize the costs of importing animals, and especially with the new tariffs and stuff that have gone into place. That's been a whole host of another thing. But yeah, it's I don't like sit there and try to be like, outwardly be like, yeah, this is helping a good cause. I don't really look at it that way. I just look at I'm providing a service to people, both educational and high quality animals, and in turn, have a great customer base, and I'm extremely appreciative of every single person that does buy, because it does help me towards trying to achieve my goals with the company. So yeah, it's I definitely think it could be a marketable aspect of things. I don't necessarily try to flaunt it or leverage it necessarily, but yeah, I'm more than happy to talk about it too, because that to me is like the education aspect of things is so much fun. That's the most fun part about having Arachnid Rarities and even doing things like this, right? It's just talking to people about, this podcast is called ArachNerds, but I am absolutely a nerd. And I'm more than happy to talk people's ears off about just, anything with science, anything with, with animals. So,
well, that is one thing I love about both the reptile hobby and the invert side, and maybe a little more so. I think it's prevalent with inverts, is sort of the hand in hand sort of relationship it has with science and academia, and even if like I'm a college dropout, I was a biology major for a whopping 3 semesters, decided it wasn't my thing, told my parents I'd stop wasting their money, and just didn't go back. But I still do enjoy finding papers and reading them, and I understand them as much as I can for the most part. But like, I still take some of that information, especially herp related, like when it comes to papers on natural history and things like that, like, and apply that to stuff in my room. And I do think that on the invert side, the relationship between the private sector and the professional side of things definitely seems to be a little closer. And I think it's supposed to be maybe because it's smaller.
I would say that. So yeah, you're touching on a really interesting topic, and why, I think there's a lot of potential in that relationship is kind of special.
Absolutely.
And I've been around in the reptile industry long enough to be honest, when you look at herpetology academia and the hobby, those traditionally conflict quite a bit. There's not a lot of academic herpetologists that are like, heck yeah, reptile hobby. There's not a lot of that at all. They really butt heads. And I, I'm not talking. I'm really generalizing. So there's a lot of really great.
Most people would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm really generalizing. There's a lot of really great herpetologists that get along well with the industry and vice versa. But I have noticed a higher percentage where it's very almost a condescending relationship. And I'm not a really big fan of being condescending. I think that's being condescending is a lost opportunity to educate in a positive manner. So instead of handling things in a way of like, oh, you just don't know, let's go with like scientific names. Right? There's some people out there that like, if somebody uses a common name, in a post, then they're getting attacked by people being like, use a scientific name,
Pinkies out.
Like, to be honest, yeah, scientific names are what you should use. But like, who gives a fuck if somebody calls something by a common name? Like, they're at least being vulnerable enough, right, to try to look for more information or to learn more. And to kind of shut that down really bothers me. So instead of, telling people there's no only right, if they have enough interest in it, then they're going to want to learn the scientific names of all these things over time. That's like a light switch. You're not just gonna be like, oh yeah, shit, I'm gonna stop using common names and then all of a sudden, go straight to scientific names. That's a process. And so, and then that's like one example. There's plenty of other different, things, whether, somebody shows their enclosure set up, right? Just, people get really harsh and it's really discouraging. Because, and you're creating a very closed-minded, industry too. And by doing that, you're closing people off. You're basically creating an environment to where like, your way is the only way type of thing, which isn't always the case. So yeah. So yeah, I think, that's where for me, that's the fun part. Give me all the people that don't know shit about inverts and are interested. Give me all those people. I'm more than happy to answer their questions. I can't tell you how many emails and messages I answer every week about people going, hey, I bought this animal. I don't know what's going on. Can you help me? I'm more, I do my best with the time that I have to answer those, to the best of my ability. But like, I don't have any, there's no benefit to me from a business side doing that. Other than, potentially maybe right down the road, maybe it's like, oh yeah, that person was really helpful. Maybe I'll buy from them.
I think it goes a long way.
But I don't really look at it that way. I just look at it like, oh, I'm just, the number one thing that I want with all my customers is for them to be successful with what they buy from me. And if I can do that, I'm happy. There's a lot of species that I keep that I do not sell. I look at when I go through and look at it, I have all these babies and things, and there's stuff I just do not offer that I honestly I probably could sell a ton of. But the care is trickier, and I'm like, the price that I'd have to ask for this and the likelihood of something to happen, I'm like, that's not fair to anybody. Even if somebody's wanting to or willing to pay for something, to me, I want them to be successful. And so, until I get stuff figured out and, to the best of the ability, I'm like, okay, I can get it to this stage. And then, I'm talking, and a lot of this most of this is like true spiders and things like that. A lot of true spiders are more difficult care. And so yeah, there's some of that from like, all right, well, until I have this really figured out and then I can get to this stage where it's, going to be good to go, then maybe consider, listing on the website. An example of this, who they've done an incredible job, is Marshall ArachNerds with the ogre spiders. So that's cool to see that whole project
have the following that it has now.
Yeah, and that started. Started as an idea a little while ago, and I've been pretty involved with them, and we talk a lot about stuff, and we were hashing out ideas, and he's Ryan and Jess, they've done an incredible job with that project and really, really successful. But that's a species again where I've worked with that species and they've worked with that species a few times prior and stuff, and we're just trying to try to figure it out, and they've really figured it out. And so that's just one example. Phenomenal work by phenomenal people. So and that's another thing for me. I love working with other other businesses and things on stuff like that. So where there's so much we can do for each other versus just kind of being quote unquote competition.
A rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah.
That's one thing about the invert hobby I've noticed too, in comparison to reptiles, and it's not that it's not present in herps, but I've noticed invert wise as a whole, it's so much more open to collaboration and realizing that I can't make a species successful in the hobby by myself. Like,
right.
get more people involved that are interested in it as well. Like, help each other out, send each other mails, like, etc. I've had plenty of people do that with me with herps. Like, I have some species snake-wise that, people were like, I think you'll do well with this. Take this ball and run with it, see if you can make it happen. And it's
Right.
like, it's nice to see that being sort of a common thing in inverts in particular. But
yeah, and we'll touch back a little bit on the academic and invert is I think, for academia, there a lot of entomologists and academics are also hobbyists
right,
in the invert world. I think that's a much more one-to-one ratio of, like, there's a lot of people that research the stuff that also do it for their hobby as well. And so that integration, I think, is more prominent in the inverts, where you have hobbyists that are also scientists that are doing taxonomic descriptions and various research. So and for better or for worse, the availability of all these species is primarily hobby driven. I mean, from a financial standpoint. And so, for me as a researcher, how do I get access to the species I need? Well, it's a lot easier to get them, captive born from hobbyists than trying to figure out, okay, I need to get this species from this country and this way and this way, right? So, and that also is an important thing. I talked previously about establishing captive bred and making sure, and when I when I do imports myself, I'm only importing, for the most part, captive bred animals. And on this last import, I did get a few wild caught from the person I import from. But again, that's a project of, all right, we're getting these animals in, and this is the opportunity to kind of establish them captive bred. And better numbers and things of that sort. So yeah, it's whenever I do acquire wild caught, it's always with intention to establish captive bred in my facility. Otherwise, I'll never buy a wild caught animal just to turn around and list it.
Yeah. Well, what's the sort of the game plan with the Paucidons you brought in recently?
Yeah.
How many of those did you end up bringing in, and sort of
shoot? So got a pretty good number. So right now I got quite a few adults, both males and females, and then kind of some semi-adult juveniles and some smaller ones as well. So kind of they said, like, about some of the more larger sizes are going to people that with intentions on breeding them. So some of the smaller ones are going, if those are anybody can buy those, they want to pet flat rock, then they can go on the website and buy them. But I was pretty careful with the older ones and things on kind of spreading those around to breeders, and I don't mean it's, I got a good number in, but not like a massive number. And so, but it's hopefully enough to kind of jumpstart in enough different sizes to kind of, as things grow and have more babies and grow and stuff, we can kind of get more of a continual cycle of them. Now, granted, still, 5-10 year plus projects.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main hurdle with those, isn't it? Is just like the gestation of the females and things like that. Because years ago, I somehow ended up with a pair. I don't know where I got them from. Oh, I think it was maybe a collection I had bought off Craigslist from someone local or something. But I had a pair of those, and I had them together, and I saw breeding, and I had like a spermatophore. Like, I watched it happen and stuff, and I that was before I really had any idea as far as what I was sort of signing myself up for in that female in particular. But like, at the time, it was one of those things where it's like, these are cool. I can, if I ever want more, I'll just go get some. And then you come back around, because I mean, they're sort of in that in the Tanzania shutoff.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another species in that same vein that comes to mind is Atheris ceratophora. Like those were super common for a really long time, imported in huge numbers, like died really well. And then everything just got shut off, and now you don't see ceratophora anywhere. Like they're virtually non-existent, I think, at this point in the private sector. Even in most of the zoos and stuff, I don't think anybody's doing anything with them. Like Flat Rock's kind of went the same way as those, to where they're just they disappeared. And
and so the interesting thing with that, especially is that, so here's some of the problem is that everyone remembers those as being like $15 a piece. And they disappeared, and everyone's like, oh, we want them, and then you get them, right? And everyone still feels like, well, these and I've told people, I'm like, hey, like, these are going to be stupid expensive. Like, there's no way around it. Like, they were stupid expensive for me, and they're going to be stupid expensive, for everyone else. But this is kind of what it takes. So between the Paucidens, the olive keelback or olive whatever, flat rocks, Pandanurus exitialis, which is a really cool species. Kind of like looks like an emperor scorpion, but with like bright gold claws. And then Pandanoides, Dufmacae. Between those three species on this import that I just got in, I think after splitting, the price of the animals and splitting the cost of everything is about and then Apistobuthus. I got Apistobuthus in as well. So between those four species, about $17,000 or $18,000.
Wow, good God!
So I mean, I talk about the amount of money that I put into those, and that's not money I'm going to see back for a while. That's for sure. Even selling the few that I am at the prices that I am, it's like this was an opportunity, and where I'm like, okay, like this might not come around again, and so might as well do it. And I'm really excited and happy that I did. But yeah, it sure. It was a hefty price tag. So.
Yeah. And I mean, to know that a decent chunk of that just went into, fees and the shipping costs and things like that too.
Yeah. So the import itself, my tariff bill was $3,100. So that was before, obviously, cost of animals. That was before shipping. So it's after all the shipping, fish and wildlife fees, broker fees, and the tariff, it put me right around $6,000 before cost of animals. So
everyone's got to get paid somehow.
Yeah. Hey, if, those that want to say, hey, I want to import, be my guest, because it sucks. It's stressful and it sucks. I do it because it allows me to have control over being able to get what I need. Needed for species I want to work with and reliably, right? Early on, before I started importing, trying to work with certain people and getting certain species, and you're spending money, and sometimes you get the stuff you order, sometimes you don't, and sometimes it's different, right? There's so many variables and at the volume that you need, and so that's where it made sense to where I'm like, all right, well, it's easier for me just to do this myself, and then on the flip side, kind of sell the surplus or sell a little bit extra to help kind of cover costs for those imports. And that's generally speaking what I try to do when I bring those imports in. I try to bring extra in just to try to cover the cost of the import. I'm not sure if I've actually ever done that. I don't know if I.
Oh, but I mean, if you're spending the money to bring them in anyways, it doesn't hurt to.
Yeah. So, well, I don't think I've I've come close to breaking even on an import. And again, I said, like, I keep back a good chunk of what I bring in for research purposes. So, and so I've come close to breaking even, but most time in my import, it's like my goal is just break even on that cost over time. And then too, like some of these species, right, that I bring in, my cost is expensive. And that's where I think and I'm okay paying what I pay for these because, stuff's high quality, comes in really good condition. And it kind of
Not
reflects
imports in the traditional sense of.
Yeah, it really reflects what I embody when I, breed and sell stuff too. So I'm really selective from that, and I'm okay paying a little extra. Getting in 1,200, 1,300 animals and maybe having 5 that are DOA. That's pretty freaking good for an invertebrate import. So yeah, everything's well patched, well maintained. So I can't, complain on that aspect of things. But in turn, more expensive for me means more expensive for for everyone else. And especially with these extra costs and things too. That's like, it is what it is. And what I try to do is, as I continue to establish these animals and produce these animals in my own facility, right, those costs are much lower. So over time, I try to reduce the prices of species when I can. And that being said too, I also think that from a standpoint of some of these species that we offer, I don't know, I do struggle a little bit that I don't know that being able to go out and buy a Lyris conquestratus for $20 is a good thing.
Yeah.
So, and obviously there's plenty of that with imports and things like that, but I do struggle a little bit with some of that to where I think that, not for the fact of trying to charge more to make money, but I think there's some things that just need to stay a little more expensive just to deter.
Right. Just from an ethical standpoint.
Shouldn't keep on type of thing.
Yeah.
So, or trying to buy on a whim, or just because you got $20 in your pocket, to make it more of a well thought out thing. So,
yeah. I was at a show 2 weekends ago, and there was a table. It was some import stuff, and they had a handful of death stalkers. I think they were like $40 or $45, but anybody could have walked up and been like, "Oh, that's a cool yellow scorpion. Like, I'm gonna buy it."
Yeah. I haven't done a show for a couple of years, but when I did do shows, I've always been, and also depending on the show, there's been plenty of people I've turned down from buying, and I even do that. I even do that through, my website and interactions and stuff too, where people reach out and say, "Hey, I want this," and I get a pretty good sense of somebody, and so I'll kind of ask some follow-up questions, and be like, "Hey, I don't think this is the right situation for you, and this isn't a good approach to take when considering something like this." And so I'm like, I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction of like kind of how to set up, or why, kind of the more happy to kind of explain things, but like I don't think this is really kind of what you're gearing towards. And so and it is kind of one unique thing, as far as like orders and things like that, is I don't have many customers that are just like buy on the site, never interact with them, ship them the thing, and never hear from them. Right. Almost all my customers, first either approach me through social media or through my website with questions about things, or they're repeat customers that we've interacted with. So I do interact with I would say almost all of my customers in some form or fashion. And I think that's important.
Well, I
I
don't
do
think it
worry.
should be as simple as like just, I like if I was ever in the rare instance that I'm actually selling animals, like I don't want someone to be able to just add it to cart, checkout, and then that be it. Like I don't want it to be like Amazon. Like I rhino rat snakes in particular, like I want to talk to the person a little bit, be like,
Right.
what you got going on? I want to sort of get a feel, like you were saying, for what they're about and where their heads at as far as keeping it and set up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree that that's the way I would prefer to do it, is for it to be a conversation first, and then
All right. Yeah. Or even if it's, I've had purchases where I'll follow up email and be like, hey, I'm not necessarily about, anything like from specifically with like a medically significant standpoint, but like, hey, with this species you got, just, just we're on the same page, I know the description says this is a really, really, really small species. And I've had people buy this species and say, hey, this is really small. And I'm like, that's why I use 3 reallys in the description. It's like, so I do have, some situations like that. I'm like, hey, let's just make sure we're good. That this is, or,
so there's no surprises.
Yeah. I try to avoid that. And every once in a while I still do. I had somebody bought something that was fourth or, 4th/5th instar. So juvenile. I sent it to them and they're like, this is not 4 inches. Oh, okay, well, shoot. Yeah, you're right. It's not. And so I go through. I'm like, hey, and I apologize for any, kind of miscommunication. Do you have any other questions or how can I help you? And then, usually I'll try to, be like, hey, if you, for the, the inconvenience or misunderstanding, I'll throw them a discount code or something for another purchase just to smooth things over. So occasionally I run into, little things like that where like I don't necessarily think about it until a customer goes, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that, but so, but for the most part, yeah, it's pretty good. So
sort of on the topic of the Verve stuff, overall, I mean, how, in the grand scheme of things, how much are scorpion and mostly scorpion, but also tarantula venoms really looked at or studied? Because it seems like tarantulas in particular, like, doesn't seem like there's really a whole lot of attention being paid to any potentials there.
There are, I think all of the, the like the pokies and some of the
I think Heteroscodra has been looked
yeah,
at.
some of the African species have kind of been studied and things. And when there's probably definitely some room from the tarantula standpoint. Unfortunately, for the tarantula standpoint, tarantulas are boring to me, so I do keep a select few. I don't offer any tarantulas anymore through Arachnid Rarities. And it got to the point because I realized that I looked around and I was like, the amount of tarantulas that I was caring for, and I never sold them. And it was like I had, I'm like, and I only need, I need less of those for my research stuff for the extractions because they bigger volume,
right.
than like something like scorpion. So I'm like, I'm spending a lot of time and I'm like, they're just not. I'm sorry, they're just not interesting to me.
Not
So
doing it.
yeah. So I, probably last summer, I basically eliminated a huge portion of my tarantulas. I still keep a good chunk stuff that is interesting to me and stuff that I have research projects designed around. But other than that,
but in terms of like what comes to mind to me as far as, I guess, to backtrack a little bit, like I think about some of these larger genre and how it seems like from my standpoint at least, they were kind of just named and then everything, like that was it. Like no other sort of research or looking into was done. They were like, Centroides, Edward's eye, they're all over the place on INAT, but it's like, does anybody really know anything about them aside from the fact that it's a Centroides Edward's eye? Like, I don't, is that a common thread with those and Titius?
Yeah. trying to find published information on venom characterizations for different species is difficult. For as many species, and that's where like people ask like how potent is the venom? I'm like, I don't know. Nobody's looked at it. So, I keep a lot of stuff that I can tell you like, what it's relative, is that, but aside from that, there's so much. Yeah. And so with the scorpions, that's for me. And also with the scorpions is people like to pay attention from the research side on stuff that's bad, right? Not bad as in,
stuff
they're
that's
bad,
more
but stuff that's,
medical concern.
yeah. Versus, I think there's tons of potential in the stuff that's not medically significant. And so that's where, I look at things of all different deals. And so, I think I'm pretty sure I'll have to do it. I need to do a count because I'm supposed to give a list for a collaboration I'm doing with someone, and I've been slacking on that. But I'm almost certain I'm at about 140 plus species of scorpions.
Wow.
So, and probably 200 species overall for invertebrates. So about another 60 species of invertebrates, and that's not talking like I just got one of them, right? This is like multiples of each, and even multiple generations of a few and stuff. So, so that's where it's like the more I can learn, and I do a lot of different localities too of different species, right? So there's some species found all across the northern part of Africa, whether it's Morocco all the way to Egypt, right? And so I have different localities, and I'm curious about differences in those localities with, I don't think you see a whole lot of different components in the venom, but you definitely see different kind of more concentration or lower concentration and just subtle differences. So that sort of thing's interesting to me as well.
And is any of that looking at what the like biological drivers are for why they're like that?
Yeah,
just a little like you're just
whether it's more diet driven or environmentally driven. Absolutely, those are all interesting questions, and they're questions that I don't. Those are. I'd hope that by me looking at that will help. Maybe inspire somebody to actually look at that piece of it. So, and that's again like the more we can, learn, the more that potentially can inspire others, or kind of inspire different thoughts and different ideas of things to look into further. So, any of that stuff, is really positive on a research standpoint. For kind of pushing the field forward in a forward direction.
Yeah, that's something I find interesting with a lot of snake species. Especially down where I am, we have a lot of barrier islands and things like that, and so you do see the differences in the mix as far as venom composition and stuff just between eastern diamondbacks, canebrakes,
right?
With, sure, coral snakes to a degree.
Yeah.
But I always find that just fascinating that there's like one small tweak that's been enough over a long enough period of time to cause it to be more effective for a specific thing.
Yeah. I think there's been quite a bit of work, really great work, looking at that sort of thing, with reptiles, not so much invertebrates, not as much. So. Definitely a lot of space.
But
some of it too is like with invertebrates, like there are so many. There's so many, and the number of people there's just not enough people working on them, right? I mean, just
right.
And some of that, right, is just maybe there's just not enough people that like bugs enough to want to do the research, but then also too, like we get back to like the funding thing. There's the funding and job availability to work in that field is less in some cases. A lot of times with entomology, your big drivers for what's bringing in funding is like pest control or agricultural, right? So those are going to be your big you're big, what brings academia funding is those departments.
Yeah, I mean the money's going to go towards things that are going to directly impact us as a species,
Yeah,
medical or financial. So I get it. It makes sense. Like,
so,
I understand why they do it, as much as it might suck to miss out on some of the other cool stuff that we're not seeing.
Yeah.
But as far as like venom compositions and in that vein, Centroides gracilis, I don't know if there's any validity to it, but I've always heard that the stuff in like Florida compared to the stuff in Central America of the same species are very, very different in terms of toxicity. Is that?
Yeah, so that's a thing, right? That's a theory. So I actually keep gracilis from. I have some that were sourced from basically kind of like a, what do you call it? An inadvertent passenger. A gracilis from the Yucatan area that was was inadvertently brought in luggage.
Yeah.
So I have that locality. I have locality from Cuba and locality from Florida. I'm trying to think. I have another. I think those are the ones. So yeah, that is in the works for looking at that. I don't have a time frame on when have information on it, but that's definitely some of the groups that I'm looking at as well. So,
and then going back to Centroides and Tideus and stuff, you see these range maps and you see these lists of all the species in a genus, and there's a lot of species, especially with Tideus, that we just don't see in the hobby. And again, it's one of those things of like, were those just named and then nothing ever happened or came as a result of it? Like with scorpion envenomation being such a problem in Brazil,
right?
Like, how do you go about getting your hands on some of those, stuff that outside of Cerululatus and some of those other things? Like, how do you pursue that?
Yeah. So, short answer is you don't. The long answer is trying to work on relationships from a research standpoint, academic standpoint, that might open up avenues. So where this gets a little tricky, and I have some species and some animals that will never be offered to the hobby. That are just strictly research source from research places, that even the offspring will never be offered. And so those kind of things, and that's an important thing for me from an integrity standpoint to stand by. That if I'm afforded the opportunity to work with certain species under these conditions, to respect that, and I get it, like from people's standpoint, the hobby standpoint, where they're like, oh,
stop holding out
I
on
still
us.
want this. I want this. I want this. And sometimes, I tell people too that I'm like, hey, sometimes it's okay that it's not here. Like it's not, like it's okay. I know they're cool.
On those two, it's like, are you really
missing
it?
Them, but it's like at the same time, like it's okay. It's okay that they're not here. It's okay they're not in the hobby. And so really kind of taking that. And I love these things. That I love working with them. I love learning about them. So yeah, there's definitely plenty of species like I would love to have, but at the end of the day, sometimes it can be for the better for the animal, that they're not being trying to.
Well, it's the exclusivity of it. It's if we're talking to like Tideus or something, and it's not something that's commonly available. It's like, is it really keeping any different? Is it having it any more different than having Stigmurus? It's like,
yeah,
you're really not.
Yeah,
it's not anything that's revolutionary or life changing necessarily. So it's like, is it really that big of a deal? You just want it because you you can't have it. It's like Cuban
Right.
cigars, you know, it's a good example. Like people, when I worked at the cigar shop all the time, people, oh, you got any Cubans? You got any Cubans? And I'm like, no. And then I have to explain, like, look, Cubans are good, but they're not that good. Like,
Yeah.
unless you smoke on a daily basis a lot, like you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Cuban tobacco and Nicaraguan tobacco. Like, honestly, it's one of those things where people want it because they can't have it. And it's like, if you've had them, they're good. But frankly, the stuff coming out of Dominican and Nicaragua, like, smokes better because they can actually roll.
Yeah.
Cubans are notorious for really not being great at rolling cigars. Like, you get a box and half of them are almost unsmokable. But like, the stuff we can't get readily is just as good, if not better, than the stuff you can't get. So it's like, it's just the tabooness of it, I guess. I don't.
Yeah. I think you go Titius, and yeah, right. Like Titius, for the most part, like, well, I mean, like there's some Titius that can be more terrestrial, some more arboreal, but most Titius are arboreal. I mean, they'll do have arboreal tendencies,
Mm-hmm.
but I keep them all the same, like the same setups, right? But you know, like I will say that I spend enough time working with these things that I pick up subtle differences that like I don't want to say bring me joy, but intrigue me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but these are differences that I almost guarantee that no one else really cares about or find exciting. It's just little things like that, like where it's like, yeah, to me, like that's super, super interesting. You know, but I'm a weird person and really, you know, really nerdy about this stuff. And generally speaking, like most people, like when, like, you know, tell like, oh, like this species, you notice this little thing. And like, okay, like, so like, oh, well, it was interesting to me, you know? And so, you know, I have an immense appreciation for nature in general, and so you know, and that just kind of goes into the passion of working with these things. So I do find like super small, little, maybe simple things really fascinating as to like the whys. Why, you know, like with the the different venom, from different localities, venom things. Like, well, the why, like, why is that? You know, why does this species that lives in the same area of this species do this instead of this, or this one's more tolerable to these conditions versus that, and giving choices. So I love giving everything I keep different choices, whether it's temperature or whether it's materials in the enclosure, figuring out where they like to hang out the most. They prefer to hang out their sphagnum or cork, or rocks and just general rocks, or like the burrow. So there's all these other things that you give them choices, and you can learn a lot more versus just looking and be like, okay, well, they just need a thin layer of sand and cork to hide. And don't get me wrong, like they'll do perfectly fine and thrive really well in some of those things. But when you start giving them choices, you can really find out some interesting things about these species.
Mm-hmm. And with stuff that has massive ranges, again going back to New World, Centroides, do you find that there is sort of a spectrum as far as would you keep Arizona barks the same way you would keep Margar tatus? Do you see sort of a spectrum of definitely more tropical tendencies versus the drier stuff?
So yeah, with Centroides, you look at those different species that you definitely keep them very different. Whether it's Vitatus, I keep Vitatus different that I find in Nebraska than what's found in New Mexico. Right,
really?
Those are different environments and different. Those have different preferences as well, and that's within the same species. I mean, likewise, look at the Centroides nigromanus. They're found in both tropical and arid areas of Mexico, so they get found in that range. So how do you keep them? Again, that's one that I'll work with where I think they have a preference for more like closer to tropical type stuff, but they're very tolerable, right? They're very tolerable in arid conditions.
Yeah.
So there's even within the same species, they have different environments that you can find them in, and so that's always an interesting thing as well. And with that, I tend to find that they're just a little more tolerable on the ranges of forget the mist for a week or two. They'll hang in there perfectly fine, versus maybe another species risk desiccation with that.
Right.
So.
What do you think the reason is? I mean, I'm sure you'd know, but like species like Limbatus and maybe not so much bicolor as far as Centroides go. Like, there's so many species in that genus in particular that you just see so infrequently. Is it just boiling down to the number of people working with them and producing them, or is there something to them that's
So there's a combination of that, and then which countries have more and more the ranges where they may be more prominent in a country that has more difficult export laws, or if at all. So so that can contribute to it. But yeah, I think the rarity, even when you have them, there's not as many people working with them. And I think what it comes down to is there's not enough people that are working with them to breed and keep them going. So you'll notice, like with certain species, they'll like spike, like, oh, they're everywhere, and then all of a sudden they disappear for a few years, and it's primarily because what was here is here, and then there wasn't a concerted effort to try to reproduce, have them reproduce, and then raise those up, and that's not necessarily out of like sometimes it's just more difficult, to where it's maybe a more difficult species. So the numbers that you need to like get a population going and maintaining over time is pretty high. Stuff like Obscurus, Titus Obscurus, which I'm working with 4 bloodlines of those right now, and really with an effort to like, all right, like let's get these up into a number to where they're more readily available, and hopefully others
on the list, man.
Yeah, so really cool. But yeah, so I got 4 bloodlines. They're all reproducing and stuff, and so I'm hoping in another couple of years have some really stable populations.
What's the typical brood size with those?
20 to 35, I think.
Wow.
I've had 20 to 35. This kind of seems to be average. But then that also is like, all right, well, like, the people that are getting them need to also, produce them too.
Right, make an effort.
The next thing is because, it's so it had to have multiple people. Otherwise, these kind of some of these species kind of fizzle out. With a lot of Centroides in Mexico, the really medically significant ones, those are difficult. You don't find those. Mexico itself has pretty strict export laws, and so that's a problem. And the other problem is most of these species are found in cartel controlled areas. So it's like, even if you went down there, for research, that's it's a tough.
Dude, it sucks because there's so like, especially like North Mexico, there's so many herps like Ophryagus and stuff like that I would love to see. Like even Mexican bears. Like I'm a big bear rat guy. It'd be awesome to see some Mexican bear rats. It sucks that it's become the way it is.
Yeah. So that adds layers of complexion, and really that adds layers of complexion in general. I think for inverts around the world is there's a lot of species and areas that are just geopolitically inaccessible. So that can be difficult.
As far as what we have in Centroides that are from Mexico, do we, trying to think off the top of my head, what what I think I've seen. I don't, because as far as like the really toxic stuff is Exilicotta.
Yeah, there's not a lot. There's been a few things here and there, but again, like the last time I saw some of these really interesting Centroides available was probably 4 years ago. I think the person that had obtained them through like another group that was doing some research on them.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted like $400 per pair for adults, and not to say that. I mean, at the time, there was no way I could swing that.
Mm-hmm.
But what was also unfortunate was that I don't think any of those went to anywhere, or any of those like ended up like kind of doing well.
Getting put in the right hands.
So yeah. So that was kind of some of those, and I see that every once in a while, to where like, shoot, man, like you don't realize how like sometimes the people have other motives, right? Of trying
Mm-hmm.
to. It's again, to me, like I'm a pretty big purist when it comes to nature. So looking at that opportunity, right, and I'm like, oh, like these really deserve to be put in hands of somebody who's able to keep them going and take care of them, regardless of the potential financial deal. It's tough to get. Not everybody sees it that way, and so that can be sometimes I've watched situations of people that refuse to work with certain people and things of that
Mm-hmm.
sort, and those opportunities just kind of end up, unfortunately, failing to thrive and being able to leverage them. So that happens occasionally. It doesn't happen all the time, but I definitely get sad. I think from a business perspective, there's definitely it's a natural thing from a business perspective to look at something and be like, oh, there's financial gain to be had by having this rare thing and produce it and sell it. Right. That makes sense, and there's nothing wrong with that. For me, I just look at it as the potential for the animal itself to
Mm-hmm.
to keep that going and learning more about it. So, um, but yeah, I also, and that's why for me, like I'm not trying to go out and make a profit, right? I'm just trying to lessen the impact costs. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I think from a business perspective, I make different business decisions than what others have to in order to survive as a business, in that regard. So, I definitely take that into account, because there's definitely nothing wrong with being able to supply and demand, sell an animal for what somebody's willing to pay. Because you do get a lot of people that complain about costs of invertebrates and things of
Paywall
that
kind of
sort.
thing.
But it's like, I think it's okay that stuff can be expensive. And and if just because it's like, I really love a Ferrari, but I'm not going to expect a Ferrari to sell for a Civic, right?
Yeah.
It's like, sure, I'd love to have one, and a Ferrari is a poor choice. I'm not a Ferrari person, but that's just kind of an example of like, sometimes like there's this expectation that, well, these should all be available at an affordable price to everyone, and that's not always practical. It's ideal,
It's
right?
like eventually they will be if
Yeah, it's an ideal
it takes off.
situation, but it's not practical. It's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think both the reptile industry and the invertebrate industry over time has become more professional in the regards of more business centric, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it continues to, and there's been more businesses, whether they're supply businesses or animal, providing animals for businesses, like there's more and more of those that are developing. And so, it does a few things. I think overall it allows for higher quality animals in general to be offered. Um, you have a wider breadth of options with that. And so it's accessible to more people, but accessible doesn't always necessarily mean affordable,
Right.
across the board. So somebody who's in their basement with, breeding a bunch of tarantulas, well, sure, they're gonna, you know, be able to sell that animal for way less than what a business has to that has overhead.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's okay. Like, it's great for people to be able to have access to those animals of the person that's in their basement breeding them, and great for that person to have business and to be
Mhm.
able to sell them for less. But on the flip side, it's also, there's a um, you have brands, right? We start to have brands now with whether reptiles or vertebrates, name brands, right? You have name
Mhm.
brand companies um, that they can ask a larger price and they get it because they're a name brand company. Well, what is a name brand company? What does that mean? What does that do? Well, that tends to go along with consistency, quality, reliability. So all of these things, and that's not saying that the person in their basement breeding tarantulas isn't all of those things, um, but it's much harder to kind of make a name for yourself in that fashion, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So it's like, what do you get when you buy? You're not only getting an animal, but you're getting a service, whether it's customer service or just service in general. um, you're getting other things besides just the animal. Especially, like, I can speak for myself, myself as a company. You know I try to offer as much with the animal as I can, to help basically kind of
Yeah, but
justify some of the extra cost.
if I was buying Margar Tatis from you versus, a flipper at Daytona, I know that those are going to be two different experiences, and I would expect to pay more from someone like yourself because, they're not imported, they're captive bred, they're, from the flipper. I'm like, hey, do you know if this is a male or female? And they're like, oh, I don't know. It's,
Yeah,
it's $15, man. Like, take it or leave it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there's different
That is one
expectations.
thing I try to add. I try to, when if I can and have time, the species I'll try to sex species that I'm able to with the microscope, and offer that. So yeah, I try to offer things here and there that I guess help justify some of that. But it's you know most people don't realize the cost of a business. They see what something's sold for, and they're like, oh, like, well, uh, here's my rent cost, here's my insurance cost, here's my, I spend, I don't know, $1,200 a month plus on food for my animals. Okay, so
Really?
so like that's probably being pretty conservative. So like all these little pieces, how much I buy in supplies and everything like that. So, um, all of that gets taken into account. Uh, and but yeah, so I think the assumed profit margin is from the general public, and a lot of times it's not even close to the actual.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking through some of the new arrivals you got because there were a few that I was curious about. Ooh. It was one of the newer species you got in. They have that off the top of my head, I don't remember the name, but they've got the weird flat spot on the tail.
Oh, the The Pistobuthus.
Yeah.
The shield tail. Yeah.
What's up with those? Are they?
Yeah. So, gosh, what a cool opportunity for those. Yeah, those I decided not to list those on the website. First of all, I'm not letting go many, maybe just a couple. Second of all, they're going to be really, really pricey. And third of all, they're really, 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 really difficult. And nobody's really been truly successful.
As far as keeping or breeding?
Yeah, keeping and breeding. Some success keeping, less success breeding. And so I've been talking with so the person I got them from, we really like a lot of discussion because I was really on the fence on whether or not I was even going to do this. And I'm like, what can you tell me to, help make me feel better about my chances with husbandry. So we had a lot of discussions around the husbandry, and kind of where. And traditionally, I think when they have been offered, they've been wild caught in very poor shape.
Yeah.
So very poor shape to begin with, making it really difficult. But their lifestyle is very Hadrurus like, so they dig really deep burrows with a high temperature gradient and a high humidity gradient. So with Hadrurus, the desert haries, those are traditionally very difficult to raise babies up to adulthood because they're never molting right. They always miss molt, and it's primarily because of they need a humidity gradient. So they're Hadrurus are digging down 6+ feet sometimes, into where the temperature and humidity is much different, and they kind of need that for the molting, right? So that's another reason why I keep a couple desert haries, but not many, because in order to keep them properly set up, I don't think anybody would really keep them if you kept them properly set up, because you're looking at 8 inches to a foot of substrate, and that's where they're going to be most of the time. It's kind of like fossorial tarantula.
Yeah.
But keep them properly is a big setup. So it's a lot of space, big setup for very few animals. So Pistobuthus, I'm taking a similar approach with these, and I'm actually stay tuned, because I will hopefully in the next couple of weeks kind of start posting on my pages their setups that I'm doing for them and kind of explain things in more detail. So definitely took a big chance on these, but I think with the information that I've gotten and what I'm going to do, should give it a pretty good crack at being successfully keeping them. I got them in some temporary things right now, and even the temporary things they've already just burrowed way down and have all these tunnels in their containers. So I'm really excited to see, once I got them in their permanent setups here in the next couple of weeks, how that's going to look.
Do you know what the purpose or significance is of that shield on the tail?
It's a good question. I would think that I'm not even going to theorize or even give an idea of my thoughts right now, because it'd be very baseless on no information. Yeah. And so that would be interesting to kind of read some, from a research standpoint, what they say about that. So
what purpose it serves. It's interesting.
It's a super interesting genus and species. I mean, just their behavior is very unique. Even just aside, like how they just lay, like they lay, like their normal resting pose is what most dead scorpions look like. It's very strange. They have a very, very strange behavior. So yeah, I'm excited to work with them and learn more about those.
Man, one species that every time I'm on your site, I see them, and my interest is piqued more and more. Is those the Aegiobuthus cyprius.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it is about them, man, but every time I look at them, I'm like, man, those are it's just a cool looking species.
Yeah, those are. I tell you what, this the Hottentota conspursus that I got in, um, they're from Namibia, is where they're originally from, but that may be one of the coolest Hottentotas that I've seen. They're almost like just bold, like kind of really bold striping on them. They have like just bold stripes. But that in person, once I started unpacking those, I was like, holy cow! Like those are impressive looking.
And then as far as these Androctonus you get, like I'm looking at the Aeneas and some of the newer ones, like how do you verify that those are what they are?
Well, they're all captive bred from described lineages. So, it's so you do have to I've definitely thrown a few under the microscope to look at specifics because that's about what it takes, especially for these like smaller like black Androctonus. Like you could throw those and mix those around. There's no way in heck you're figuring out what's what for a while. But there are subtle differences. And again, that goes to what I was speaking to earlier, but just behavioral differences. To where, I have so many species of black Androctonus, and some of them sell, some of them don't. And I understand it that I have. It's almost overwhelming, right? There's so many different species. Like you're like, what's what, and what do I need to get, or what do I diversity. Have? And but those subtle differences to me is what's fascinating to me about them. So I love them. I can't tell you how many species that I'll buy and keep that I have on my website that nobody buys them, and every opportunity I always get more because it's I don't again it's one of those doesn't make business sense, but for me it's these are awesome. I find these fascinating for this reason, and so that's one thing early on. Just because I get really excited about a species doesn't mean everyone else will. And so I've definitely found myself getting a bunch of something that I just sit on and never moves because it was way more interesting to me than everybody else. So
yeah, those Zagrosensis are really cool too.
Yeah, it's another awesome one.
It's another genus that, man, it's it seems to get bigger and bigger by the.
Yeah, the different in the ranges of sizes from smaller to larger, and again, a lot of those have subtle differences too when you get into the mix of things.
Yeah. A lot of Centroides though. You gonna have any more bicolor anytime soon?
Yeah, I got a few paired. I'm hoping. Seems like I don't know. Our thunderstorm season's kind of been a little later. I think we've had quite a few storms lately, and usually, so instead of usually having some April, May thunderstorms, we had very few. So everything from a baby standpoint is happening a little later, later in the year this year for me. I'm pretty sure it's just tied to some of those weather conditions. But whenever we have bad thunderstorms, it's usually scorpion baby time. So
is that sort of across the board, or do you notice that more so in your tropical stuff?
Across the board.
Really?
Yeah. And I think it's across the board because I think a lot of those desert species have babies during monsoon season. Mm-hmm. So that's when the water source, the food source is at its highest for those babies, to the best chance of survival. So, yep, even the desert species will tend to drop during these storms. So,
Yeah, man, bicolor and limbatus, those are just even some of the like the what's the term, like your Caribbean Titius.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. Those Antilles
yeah,
type island ones.
you know what the sort of the story is with that? Because everywhere I see them, it's just Titius species Antilles.
So they're not
Don't look like
described yet.
yet. Okay.
So I know what island they came from. Um, unfortunately, um, the scientist, so Rolando, the scientist that was researching a lot of that stuff, passed away a couple of years ago, and so I'm not sure. I think some of those species descriptions are kind of just tabled
Mm-hmm.
because of that. Um, so, so yeah, I mean, there's actually honestly over the last few years, there's been some serious loss with phenomenal scorpion researchers for,
Really?
yeah, just you know, really unfortunate. A few have passed away. And there's not a lot of really good scorpion researchers to begin with. There's just very few and far in between, and there's been 3 or 4 guys over the last few years that passed away. Super sad. But yeah, just it's tough to fill those shoes
Mm-hmm.
of the work that they've done. So
I meant to ask you too the first round about the pillar tails. Because that's one I've always seen in books and I've seen them for sale, but I really know nothing about them. I mean, every time I see them, it seems like they're in groups.
yeah,
Are they like uber communal sort of?
I keep the adults in groups. I think I have 4 species that I'm working with.
Are those
2 of the species I have adults of that I have in groups. They're a little tricky. I mean, I think they're commonly they commonly get imported in with the Egypt stuff, the Orthochirus anesi or whatever is what you typically see. And I don't think I think their reproduction's a little difficult in captivity, right? So I think you get babies sometimes from those imports, but um, producing in captivity can be a little more tricky. So
Is that similar to the shield tails as far as like it's a
I don't.
humidity thing?
I do think they require a little more humidity in certain situations. It's one of those can't be too wet, can't be too dry. But they don't like burrow down deep. Like I mean, they're pretty. If you give them the option, they just kind of hang out underneath of things. They're not really digging deep into stuff. So yeah, that's a genus that's fairly new to me. I've not worked with them. I there's been quite a few genuses over the years where I'm like looking at them like I don't know if I want to dig into those quite yet. The Orthochirus is one of them that like kind of like this last November, so really new to me, where I'm like, all right, like I'm gonna make a concerted effort to get a few different species in and work with them. Let's kind of see how it goes. And so far, I've been real successful from a just growth and molting process with them. But yeah, I tend to I tend to be pretty cautious about dipping into some of these genuses that are more maybe historical, a little tougher to care for, just because I want to, if I'm going to do it, I want to make sure I give them the attention needed to do it the right way. Again, that's something like the Hojuros or the Desert Harries. I just don't. I'm not a big native, U.S. scorpion person. Not because I don't like the species, just like if I'm going to keep them, I want to do it the right way, and doing it the right way is a little more labor intensive than what I have time for at the moment, type of thing.
Yeah, makes sense. It's aside from Arizona Barks, I don't know. I've wanted to get my hands on some like Hensai or Batata, some of the native stuff. But as far as tarantulas go, for whatever reason, I've really come to appreciate a Phonopelma and the stuff we have here. Which years ago I was kind of like, yeah, it's a brown spider, that's cool. Like give me the fast blue stuff, sexier. But the more I see some of the blacked out Phonopelma and some of the other stuff that we've got right here in our own backyard, man, maybe it's just because I'm getting older and I have more of an appreciation for native stuff, but it has
it definitely gets the I think it goes to the fact of you don't appreciate quite as much because it's always there kind of thing. Like it's in people's backyards, and so when it's in your backyard, it's like just another thing, right? So versus I think some of those species in other places are very desirable for the same reason why we desire certain species in other places as well. And it probably goes to that exclusivity thing, right? Can't get your hands on it type of thing. So, but yeah, I mean, even looking at Calco, how do you say it? Anthonopella,
Calcotes.
Yeah, Calcotes. The different localities, the differences of those. You start to go up in higher elevation to like New River and Arizona and stuff. They just look different, and so all those little subtle differences. Yeah, I think are interesting and find fascinating. But that's also too goes hand in hand with like, I enjoy going out and finding and seeing those species. But I don't. Maybe that's satisfying enough for me to not worry about keeping. Like I can go out and just go find them and look and see and So there's that too, that kind of appreciation thing.
But I had a group of Vehovis carolinianus, which is the only native species we have here, and I had a small group of those that I had collected, and they were really, really cool little scorpions too. And part of it was just the fact that it's right here. Like I don't have them down here on the coast. I have to go more upstate to get a hold of them, but I just find it so cool that it's like we don't have a lot of scorpions like they do out west. Like we've got the one, and it's severely underappreciated in my opinion. Like they're a cool little species.
I definitely get a lot of people asking about them.
Do you really?
I don't keep that species, but I do get a lot of people that ask about them. So,
because I remember back in the on ArachNerds and stuff, you'd see them for sale every now and then, but they never seemed. And that's another one too, where it's like I feel like they named it and they were like, cool, on to the next. And there really wasn't anything else done with it. Because I mean, you look at them, I'm like, how is this Vehovis? And then you look at everything out west, it doesn't really add up. But I also don't think that species has been looked at since it pretty much got described. So I don't know. Let me get my hands on some more here soon. Other than that, we're about the 2-hour mark. So
shoot.
Anything else you want to cover? Anything with Scolopendra as far as the Verve stuff goes? Like another uncharted territory.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit in the first episode. I do have a few. I'm working with a few, but that's always one that's like the cost to get into some of those is so much, and they're super interesting. And but yeah, I would like to see more. I mean, there's a few people doing some really awesome work with captive breeding centipedes, and so for me, I think I'm slowly getting more and more into them, but definitely taking more of the route of trying to get more of the captive bred stuff and raise that up than just buying a bunch of wild caught subadults or adults, especially with the cost on some of those. I mean, they're not cheap.
Yeah.
They're not cheap. Super fascinating. Hopefully, I probably need more room, more space in order to keep a lot of these in the higher numbers and stuff too. So take that into consideration.
Any species in particular with those that you're really honing in on?
Not necessarily. No, nothing like, I don't know, nothing really too crazy or interesting.
Not like the Hardwicki or anything like that.
Yeah, I've debated about. I've tempted myself multiple times on trying to, and for me, like I've tried, like, all right, like, it doesn't do me much good to get like one or two, and so I've tried to find avenues of like, hey, like, I know they're expensive, but what can you do for like 10? And so far, that price has always been higher than what I want to consider. Yeah. So at some point, yeah, but not at the moment. So,
yeah.
But I'm getting a bunch of stuff. I touched on the Epistobuthus enclosures, but I'm getting a ton of stuff coming in. Should be this week, maybe beginning of next week, of new setups for a lot of scorpions. I'm redoing all of my tropicals into different setups to. I don't know if it'll save space. It's going to consolidate a little bit of space, but I'm really excited for I'll share because it'll be a little unconventional probably than what most people. It goes a little bit against of what like I necessarily recommend for people, but hopefully I can maybe show an example how to do it properly. Put it that way. So look. So along with the Pistobuthus setups, the overall enclosure setups and things of that sort, I'm doing a bunch of stuff here coming up the next couple of weeks. So I'm pretty excited about.
It's awesome. I'm looking forward to that.
Thanks for having me on for part 2.
Absolutely.
I'm sure in a little while we could probably have enough more material for part 3 even. So
yeah.
Get the rest
I know I've had people ask for more Scorpion content, so we'll definitely, maybe we could get into some sort of genus specific episodes here and there, and get into the nitty gritty on some Androntes.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Well, yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. This was episode 12 of ArachNerds, brought to you by Fulvius Apparel. Go shop around, get you some shirts, hats, coffee mugs, hoodies. It's too hot for hoodies right now, unless you're somewhere far up north. Use the code THN at checkout, get 15% off your order. That is the exclusive promo code for THN listeners and viewers like you. We may be back for Snakes and Stogies Monday. I don't know anymore. Schedules have been all kinds of jacked up. So keep an eye out for that. And we will catch everybody later. Thank you.